Well, welcome to Tim's Take, and we have Dr. Eric Bailey, our beef nutrition specialist for the University of Missouri in the Division of Animal Sciences. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks, Tim. Really glad to be here, and I'm glad that we've been able to record these series of podcasts together talking about this really important drought topic.
This is fantastic, but our typical Missouri beef producer, what do we have?
So we're the number 3 state in the country for beef cows, over 1.8 million beef cows. We generally run about 3 acres per cow. That's the most common number that you'll hear now. That's
for year round.
That's for year round. But in reality, most farmers are feeding hay for 90 to 120 days of winter. So in reality, it's probably more like that's 3 acres for 8 to 9 months. But it's also a little bit of a misnomer, right? Because, I mean, north of I-70 is a very different production system than south of I-70. And, you know, east of I-44 is a different production system than west of I-44, even though I-44 kind of runs southwest to northeast, if you know, catch my drift, right? So there's 3 different production systems in this state, if you think about it long enough.
And these 1.8 million head, we're about number 1 or 2 in number of farms too, aren't we?
Yes. So on average, there's about 35 beef cows. I think there's 43,000 farms in the state that have beef cattle on them of some flavor. So, you know, that also becomes a challenge in and of itself because we've got such a diversity in small production systems. Mm-hmm. So,
who may also have some limitations of what they can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you have 35 cows, you're not going to go buy a $20,000 mixer wagon to feed corn silage in the winter, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, because we're talking about drought and we're talking about alternative feed sources and what to feed when you have no feed. Well, I mean, you really only have so much capital to invest to put yourself in a position to be successful, whether that's anything from putting up grain bins and storing commodities, feeding corn silage, being able to make a total mixed ration and deliver that to cows. I mean, there's some limitations that we have to be cognizant of as we go out to these extension meetings and talk to farmers about how to help them. You kind of got to meet them halfway, right? So,
and in that I-44 corridor, for example, there's not a lot of grain production during that.
Exactly.
So
right.
They can't go out and have corn stalks for grazing or
yeah, I mean, if you look at the basis, right, so the difference between the cash and the futures price for corn, I mean, north of I-70, you're often this time of year in a negative basis, 10, 20 cent, meaning that your cash price is 10 to 20 cents below what the futures market might suggest it is. But you get into southwest Missouri and you might be at a 50 cent positive basis, meaning that you're paying 50 cents above it because the basis is covering essentially transport and storage. So Tim, you're absolutely right there that, you know, if the futures contract for corn is $4.70 a bushel today, you know, you may not be able to get it for less than $5.20 in Bolivar or, you know, Polk County or somewhere in that neck of the woods. And I'm not picking on any specific elevator, town, county, or anything. It's just
sure.
You know.
Those are great examples. So now off the air, we're talking a cow-calf operation. Is that intensive, or is that more of the less intensive system that we do?
You know, that's a great question. So we've done a great job over the years of promoting the use of managed grazing systems and rotational grazing, and you know, the grazing schools have served. Oh my gosh, I want to say that there's been 25 to 30,000 people that have gone through the grazing schools. It's a big number because there's 22 to 24 grazing schools held across the state every year, and each of those schools are going to have, you know, 25, 30, maybe 40 if it's a large one, participants sign up. And because they are a prerequisite for cost share funding from NRCS, we sort of have an evergreen audience to go through these grazing schools. So while we have intensified our production system, there's still a number of farms. You don't have to go very far out into the country to see a farm that's a very low input, continuously grazed, continuously stocked, no rotations ever type farm. So, I mean, we've done a great job with that, but we still got more more folks that we need to get converted over, right?
And are those the folks that are in trouble, you think, more? Or
So at least right now, I think everybody's kind of
Sure.
in a tight spot just because of the severity of the drought. But when you implement a rotational grazing system, the potential exists to double the carrying capacity of your farm by implementing a rotational grazing system. Now, there's caveats, right? So there are some of the gurus out there who will claim that you grow 2 times more grass because you implement these management practices. That's not true. The data would show that when you implement a rotational grazing system, what you're doing is you're getting a 10 to 20% increase in total forage biomass produced per acre per year. What you're doing with a rotational grazing system is you are actually increasing the proportion of the grass grown that ends up in a cow's mouth. So that's called a harvest efficiency or a forage utilization rate. So if I continuously stock a pasture and I've got a beef cow out there for 365 days of the year, and there's enough grass for her to live on that same pasture every day of the year, she is going to graze plants that she prefers off. When they regrow, she comes back and regrazes them again. She ignores other plants in the field that have already matured, that are lower quality, and she will consume roughly 1/4 or 25% of the forage that's actually grown. The other 3/4 she'll either ignore, she'll trample, she'll foul, because cows won't eat very close to where they defecate. Right. And when we go in and we implement a rotational grazing system, we increase something called the stocking density. So stocking rate is acres per cow, with stocking density being pounds of beef per acre. We know, and the data would show, that as we increase stocking density, we decrease selectivity in the diet, and we make cows go out and hustle to graze, and they learn to be less picky, less selective, and to just meet their intake needs, to meet their nutrient requirements. And so, that's the beauty of, if you take an 80-acre field and you cut it into 8-10-acre paddocks, right? So if I have on an 80-acre field, and let's say I'm going to do 4 acres per cow for easy math, so 20 cows on 80 acres, okay? 20 cows on 80 acres, 4 acres a cow. Let's say that cow weighs, let's say 1,200 pounds. So I got 300 pounds of beef per acre, right? So 4 acres, 1,200-pound cow, 300 pounds of beef per acre. If I take 20 cows that weigh 1,200 pounds and I put them now on 10 acres, now I have 2 cows per acre. So I have 2,400 pounds of beef per acre. So I've increased my stocking density by a factor of 8, a little less than 8, but I'm rounding for easy math purposes.
And that becomes a lot more efficient then.
And that becomes a lot more efficient. And then when we have that happen, the harvest efficiency, the forage utilization rate, will go from 25% to 45%. And guess what? Now I've doubled the amount of feed available for my cow, nearly doubled the amount of feed available for my cow. And I've increased the health of my forage stand. And so I get an extra 20% bump in production, and that's how all of a sudden I have twice as much feed as I used to, how I doubled my carrying capacity. None of the gurus out there and I'm going to call the regenerative ag folks out in particular, because there's some that are really sort of stepping out there and making some big claims in terms of forage production potential. Mm-hmm. It's not forage production potential. It's an increase in harvest efficiency that's occurring, right?
Now, for this person with 35 head, do they, and they probably work somewhere else, because they have to, that's just part of it. Would they have the time to do rotational grazing?
So rotational grazing, I'm really glad you brought that up, Tim, because that's one of the misnomers of rotational grazing. Rotational grazing is not continuous stocked pasture all the way to 4 moves a day, right? So when I rented that farm in Randolph County, and I it had the grazing lease had a restriction in it where I couldn't use hot wire fencing to divide pastures. So what I did instead was I put all of the cattle in one group and I just rotated through the pastures that were there. There was 7 pastures in existence. And so I rotated them through rather than splitting the cows up 7 ways. I can still accomplish the same objective. I move those animals, during the growing season, I moved them about once every 5 days. So rotational grazing, you can have benefits by going from never ever move to once a week moves. Honestly, if you think about the difference, which is a greater difference, between 0 and 1 or between 1 and 2? It's a trick question, right?
Yeah.
The difference between 0 and 1 is larger than the difference between 1 and 2 because the difference between 0 and 1 is infinite, right? Mm-hmm. The difference between 1 and 2 is only 1. And so you get a big response out of just starting something, just starting a rotational grazing system. If you can only move cows once a week, that's better than the cows being on the same pasture all the time.
And if you're in that 35 to 50, you're talking just an evening to move.
Absolutely.
Maybe you just open the fences up and the gates and they'll move themselves.
Well, and I was custom grazing, kind of waspy yearlings for somebody. But after I did it 3 times, they knew that when I came out there and opened a gate, that they were going to go on to fresh feed.
Oh, so they were waiting for you, probably.
So they were, after the 3rd or 4th move, they saw me coming and they came running because they knew they were going to get fresh feed. And so, that's what I don't think we appreciate enough about this type of system is that we're in a sense, we're almost giving them candy. We're giving them a supplement because they're going out to higher quality feed than they were on previously. And so they really begin to associate you with supplement. And it's no different than taking a bag of grain out there, right? And every time you go out there and hand feeding them a little something in a bunk, you don't take them very many times of doing that for them to basically be, to come running and be waiting for their candy.
I will admit, yesterday morning I had some pumpkins that I threw out in the pasture. This morning they were waiting for me for the treat again.
Absolutely,
they learn real quick.
that is a very, very common occurrence, and that's just one of those things that we can't quantify, right? And it's really difficult to talk about in a rotational grazing promotional material because there are things that we as reductionist scientists cannot quantify, but boy, you go out into the real world and you do it and boom, right? Now, I do want to make one point clear before we move on. You are not going to increase your harvest efficiency or your forage utilization rate from 25 to 75. You're probably not going to improve it from 25 to 65 without at least 1 move per day, maybe even 2 moves per day. Like we can get to a point where we allocate, if let's say 20 cows needs, let's say 25 pounds of dry matter per day, and that's 500 pounds of feed. We could go out there and allocate 500 pounds of feed and they'll clean that up, but then we got to put them somewhere else the next day. That's maximum harvest efficiency. The once a week move is not going to get you there, but the once a week move is going to take you from 25 to 35, maybe even to 40. And right there, even that, that's a 40 to 50% increase in your forage utilization rate.
And probably quality too.
And quality too, absolutely. And quality too. The amount of rest that you incorporate back into your farms, that's the big secret that people aren't thinking about is that, you need 21 to 30 days of rest between grazing events in the spring. And other times of the year, you probably need double that. Because essentially what you're trying to do, fescue is an interesting plant because it grows 3 leaves. Once the 4th leaf starts to grow, the first leaf dies, right?
Only 3 leaves at a time.
Only 3 leaves at a time. So when you go out and you're evaluating your pasture, whether it's ready to regrow or not, if you've only got 1 leaf on your plant, it's not ready. If you've got 2 leaves, try to wait till that 3rd leaf begins to come, right? So they call it kind of 2.5 leaf grazing. But essentially what you're doing is you're allowing the plant to regrow a full complement of leaves before you go back to it. And that rate's going to change over time depending on, the growing conditions in the spring are ideal as the wettest months of the year. Fescue grows at 70 degrees, I think is the optimum growing temperature for it. So, plus those are the longest days of the year. Right. So we get growing degree days. That rate of fescue growth is going to change over the course of the year.
And it also can help affect your diversity of your legumes in your pasture. They don't get grazed out too quick.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're implementing a strategy where you're frost seeding clover into tall fescue, and the cows are continuously stocked on those pastures, the clover is going to be the ice cream plants. I like to describe it as ice cream plants, the ones that they prefer, the ones that they go to first. That's the reason clover doesn't last in a lot of fescue stands, pastures that are continuously stocked, because the ice cream plants are the clover, and the ice cream plants are the ones that get grazed out first.
Overgrazed.